Okay, let's turn back to the rape gang issue because, in for a penny, in for a pound. And so if you don't mind, what I would like you to do is, I've looked at the rape gang issue as much as I possibly could as an outsider to the UK, right? And was shocked by it, absolutely shocked beyond comprehension that such a thing could even be vaguely possible. I couldn't even believe it when I first started to investigate it, which was probably about 15 years ago, by the way. And so the first thing I'd like you to do for people who are watching and listening, and for me, is do you want to just describe what you see as the reality of the rape gang situation in the UK? Just lay it out. You mentioned 50 cities and up to something approximating 1 million victims. So tell us what you believe to be the case in the UK with regards to these rape gangs. Define them and then tell us what the case is.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that this will go down in history, I think, as the biggest scandal in British society, one that much of the establishment deliberately ignored and downplayed for half a century. What we are talking about, to be clear, is the sexual exploitation of mainly young, white, working class girls, often from very damaged, broken homes, vulnerable girls. The organized, industrial scale rape and sexual assault of those girls by predominantly Pakistani Muslim gangs of men operating in alliance with one another, trafficking those girls from one town to another, often having some kind of connections with police, social services. We have police officers who have been arrested and being brought before courts because of their involvement with these rape gangs. And the rumors of this really began, Jordan, from the 1970s, 1980s. But it wasn't really until 2011 when one or two rogue journalists started to talk about the issue, and some prominent political activists and campaigners too. But this was instantly branded a topic of far-right politics. It was seen as low status to talk about it in Westminster. And then as the transcripts came out of these girls, as the number of towns increased, as I say, upwards of 50 towns and cities across the UK, and lots of young girls coming before court saying they were put on heroin, they were put on cocaine, they were told they were targeted because they were white, they were non-Muslim, and they were trash. They were white prostitutes. Those are words that were used in the court transcripts. And as the evidence simply became unavoidable, we then started to get these local inquiries into key towns like Rotherham, a town where 1,400 girls at least were raped and sexually assaulted by these gangs, towns like Oldham and Telford. And it wasn't really until actually the beginning of 2025 that the release and the recirculation of some of those transcripts, in conjunction with Elon Musk drawing attention to it, basically forced Westminster, forced the elite in Britain to actually do something and talk about this crisis in a much bigger way. But even then, they said, actually, we're not going to have a national inquiry into this issue, which is outrageous because this is clearly a systemic national crisis that involves social workers, police officers, Muslim communities, gangs of men. It's been going on for 30, 40 years. Some of these girls, by the way, have been murdered. I just want to mention a few names: Lucy Lowe, Victoria Agoglia, Charlene Downs. Everyone around the world has heard of George Floyd. Nobody's heard those names. These are girls who were murdered when they were 12, 13, 14 years of age. Like you, I'm a father. I find this absolutely despicable. And even when, in some of these cases, even when fathers in desperation were trying to get their daughters back, were trying to save their daughters from these gangs, they were then arrested. They were then told that they were breaking the law. So every aspect of this scandal is utterly hideous. And the fact that our Labour government, which has announced 25 national inquiries for other issues, cannot bring itself to launch an inquiry this time around, also tells you a lot. It tells you that Labour is scared about the scale of this crisis. It tells you that Labour officials are probably implicated in this crisis. And we do know that some Labour officials have been implicated in this crisis in local towns in England. It tells you that this crisis probably goes much deeper within the state than we currently are being led to believe. And it tells you again that because the victims are white working class girls, that within the matrix of social justice ideology, which dominates many of the public sector institutions, they are simply not seen as being fashionable or important enough to warrant the same level of attention and concern that other groups in our society receive.
Okay, let's see if we can sort out why that is, because you might assume that if the elites that we were describing have a harm ethic, like a harm reduction ethic that you might associate with a maternal instinct gone astray, that a logical target for an empathic impulse like that might be underprivileged working class girls. Like, it doesn't seem to stretch the bounds of credibility unless, and I think I've maybe detected this as a strain in British society because I'm a bit of an outsider looking in, unless part of the motivation for the virtue signaling on the part of the people who are ignoring this, including upper class women, is to separate themselves as much as they possibly can from any hint whatsoever of contamination with that lower class status. Is that? I know that's a harsh judgment, but
no, I think there's a lot to do with that. Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with that.
Okay, so let me add another layer to that. And again, I'm speaking as an ignorant man. I'm not a citizen of the UK, and I'm trying to sort out what the hell's going on there as an outsider. I really became aware of the grooming gangs as a consequence of my knowledge of Tommy Robbinson. And I started watching him about 15 years ago, and I interviewed him last year, my wife first, and then, or my wife and I, it was actually at her instigation. And then we did 2 interviews. And my sense with Tommy was, I kind of understand him because I was raised in a working class environment, by the way. And so I understand what sort of character he is. And he's also super bright. He's remarkably intelligent. And, he's got a checkered past. But my sense of Tommy Robbinson, and I'm more than happy to hear your take on this, is that He's a representative of the working class. He saw what was happening to the girls in his community, including his own cousin, who fell prey to these gangs, and he started to make quite the damn fuss about it. And he wasn't afraid to point fingers, particularly in the direction of the Pakistani rape gangs. And we have to talk about the fact that they're, because we're already in serious trouble in 7 different ways, they're Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. That's the ones we're concentrating on. And at the moment in the UK, from what I understand, and this has been the case for quite a while, to specify it that carefully and precisely, let's say, opens you up to accusations of being like a far-right neo-Nazi, like Tommy Robinson, let's say. So tell me what you think about Robinson and the reaction to him. I mean, I know people like Piers Morgan. I get along fine with Piers. He's treated me great. We've had lots of good discussions. He's certainly no fan of Tommy Robinson, and he's pilloried in the British press as a general rule. I know there was a huge demonstration, last week? 100,000 people, I heard. The legacy media never bloody well reported it. Anyways, tell me what you think about that mess.
So I've always found Tommy Robinson interesting for a number of reasons. We're a similar age. He grew up in Luton, which is very close to the town. I grew up on the outskirts of somewhere called St. Albans. I'm very, he reminds me of lots of the guys I grew up with. I don't want to make it too personal. My background was somewhat similar, not stable, certainly wasn't middle class. And so when I saw him first break through in 2009, 2010, drawing attention to this issue, I I sort of understood where he was coming from and the anger and the frustration that was driving that. Now, where I departed from Robinson is that I felt at the time that being so provocative, and this was between 2009 and 2013-14, with his movement, the English Defence League, by being so provocative on the streets, I felt that he was playing into the hands of the state, that he was becoming useful for the state, which was then saying, well, if you talk about these issues, you're like these guys. And I think he's obviously been on a journey. He's not the same person today that he was then. But I think the reality of Tommy Robinson is that he would not have become a prominent, significant figure in our national political life, which he is, were it not for the sustained failures of the British state to deal with the issues that he has been campaigning on. Had they taken this issue seriously, had they investigated the rumours, had they looked at the rise of radical Islamism as well, particularly within some of the communities that Robinson knows very well, then he wouldn't have become a significant figure. So, he certainly gave voice to some of the issues that were being ignored, as did, by the way, a few other people at the time, some renegade journalists and so on. But I think at the same time, though, and this is it's a sensitive conversation, because I think everybody who cares about this issue, cares very strongly about it, right? My view is that the only way we can change Western societies today, we can save Western civilization, we can reassert the values that we care about, is through the ballot box. That's my view. That the only way forward is by appealing to a majority of concerned citizens, by bringing together a broad coalition of people who say, actually, enough is enough. I'm not going to have this project imposed on me anymore. I'm not going to support mass uncontrolled immigration. I'm not going to be told that little boys can become little girls and little girls can become little boys. I'm not going to see my country, my home be denigrated in this way. I want to push back through the ballot box. And to me, that's the only viable, alternative, plausible way forward. It's not to say that I think these people are wrong to be highlighting these issues, but I think if you're serious about bringing about change, changing things, changing policy, changing government, I think the ballot box is the way forward. I don't think Britain has the same culture as France, Italy, and other countries whereby street protest is embraced or supported. I think we have a very distinctive political culture in this country, which social scientists have talked about from the 50s onward. We have a civic culture. We're very skeptical of anything that might look like it's aggressive, anything that might look like it's, challenging the rule of law. And I think ultimately it's about what approach do you think is really the most viable way to bring about change?